Hey folks, you are tuning into Common Groundwater, a podcast by the Michigan Environmental Council, where we talk about issues felt across the state of Michigan, dig deep into their nuances, and bring out the stories and solutions to them. You are tuning into the first episode of our A Better Bottle Bill mini-series. If you're a Michigander listening, you'll probably know this issue well, you'll know the situation well. We're here to talk about Michigan's bottle deposit system. It's the system in place across the state where you can return cans and bottles and get a little bit of money back that you can then spend on things like groceries. It's a bit of a unique system. There's only a handful of states that have it, and we're here to talk about not only its history and its impact, but also the ways in which that we can make it even better in the future. The bottle deposit system is coming up on its 50th anniversary, and I'm delighted to be here with Bill Rustem, who is very much, as we'll find out, tied to the history and to the anniversary of this system in place. So Bill, thanks so much for being here today.
Good to be here, Bo.
Well, you and I both brought drinks. I asked you beforehand if we could both bring something that we liked to drink that can be returned through the bottle deposit system. What did you bring today? What's your drink of choice here for us?
I brought a native Michigan product, Werner's Ginger Ale, which has been in Michigan for a long, long time, now owned by another company, but it's still a native Michigan product.
Yeah, that is great. I wish I would have thought of that a bit more. I went very generic, very national with my Diet Coke, but it's my drink of choice. I'm not going to pretend that I
Well, the Werner's, just a quick story.
Yeah.
My mother always used to give us that when we had an upset stomach when I was growing up, and so may have been a few times when I kind of faked an upset stomach so I could get some Werner's.
I like that. I never did get to utilize that method to get to get like a drink when I was little.
It worked.
Yeah. Good to know. I teed you up a little bit. I mentioned that you are kind of intrinsically tied into our bottle deposit system in place in Michigan. Could you talk a little bit about that connection that you have and maybe your connection to some other environmental efforts at large across the state?
Sure. Well, I spent 13 years working for Governor Milliken way back in the 1970s. And of course, the bottle bill was adopted by the people in 1976. That's why we're coming up on that 50th anniversary here in 2026. And just a brief history. Milliken endorsed the bottle bill. He was good friends with Tom McCall. McCall was the governor of Oregon. Oregon had the first bottle bill. And Milliken was good friends with McCall, and it actually endorsed and called for the adoption of a bottle bill in Michigan in 1969. Working with the legislature, trying to get a bill passed. Well, we never could get the bill out of committee, and never got a committee vote on it, until in 1976 we thought we had the votes in committee to get it out. Well, it turned out that one legislator bailed on us, and we couldn't get the vote out of committee, at which point Tom Washington, who was the head of the Michigan United Conservation Clubs at the time, and they were a strong supporter, and Elton Smith, who was at the Michigan Farm Bureau, and also a strong supporter of the bill, got with Milliken and decided, since we had an initiative process in the Constitution of the state of Michigan, that there was going to be a petition drive to get it on the ballot, and that's what we did. And I took a leave of absence from Milliken's office, went over to work for MUCC, and we collected 400,000 plus signatures, which was way more than were needed. And then I took another leave of absence to help run the campaign to get the thing adopted by the people, and it passed by a 63 to 37% margin, despite the fact that we had unions opposed to us, we had grocery stores opposed to us, we had beer distributors opposed to us, beer manufacturers, everybody. There was a lot of opposition, or very well financed opposition, but we were able to prevail.
Yeah, I think that's what makes me so excited to talk about this topic of the bottle deposit system today and across these other episodes that we'll have, is partly because, one, the bottle deposit system just feels very somewhat uniquely Michigan in that, like, we just kind of grew up with it, right? It's just a natural part of our lives, and yet it has a big impact. But also because, as you mentioned, like, not only is it uniquely Michigan, but like Michiganders were the ones that first enacted it.
It was the citizens of Michigan that enacted it. Milliken was signed the first petition. He was the first signer on the petition, Governor Milliken was. And then we were able to collect, as I said, 400,000 plus signatures. Never paid for a single one. It was all volunteers. It was the Farm Bureau, Michigan United Conservation Clubs, the West Michigan Environmental Action Council. There wasn't an MEC at the time.
Yeah.
And other organizations also kicked in, but we had a cadre of volunteers across the state that, just hung out and got signatures and turned in 400,000 plus.
That's great. And I should say too that from my understanding of the Michigan Environmental Council's own history, the organization I work for, groups like the West Michigan Environmental Action Council,
Right.
a few other local groups.
There was an East Michigan Environmental Action Council, yes. Yeah. They were all participants in this.
Yeah.
It was a coalition of like-minded people. As people often ask, well, why was the Farm Bureau involved? Well, think about a couple things. Number one, most of the beer and pop was in glass containers, and people were tossing those out along the roadside. Think about how much it costs to replace a tractor tire if it runs over a sharp shard of glass. So the Farm Bureau, plus farmers were picking them up along the roadway because they owned the property, and so they were very supportive, and it was a good group of people to work with.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that a bit more in just a second. And I'll have to say too, as someone who grew up in small town Michigan,
Yep.
I know those country roads. I know how much trash gets just naturally thrown.
So did I.
Yeah,
so did I. I grew up in small town Michigan too, near Frankenmuth, and it was a problem. It was a big problem.
Yeah.
So not only did the bill, I think the adoption of the bill cut that glass and plastic and now aluminum litter off of our roadways, but it also helped create the environmental ethic that I think is so important and so ingrained in all of us in Michigan because we have such natural wonders surrounding us.
Yeah. Were those some of the two prime movers of Governor Milliken, in perhaps a view too when he was wanting to promote the creation of the bottle deposit system? Was litter the big issue?
Litter was the big issue.
Yeah.
Litter was the big issue, yeah. It was litter, not only the visible litter along our roadways, but the invisible litter in our lakes, in our streams. And so, fishing organizations, others were a part of this effort to get the bottle bill adopted.
Yeah. And to go back to something I was hoping to cue up a little bit earlier, it seemed like the 1970s were, at least from my young person lens, it seemed to be a pretty good time environmentally for Michigan, where there was a lot of big changes, good changes happening.
Yeah.
The bottle bill being one of them. Was there also just kind of like a positive movement of sorts around people just wanting to do the right thing in terms of protecting their environment?
Absolutely. It was really a kind of a golden era we got the Wetlands Law, we got a Wilderness Act. I can go through. We got the Natural Resource Trust Fund. There's a whole bunch of really important laws that passed during the 1970s. Milliken was. You have an award named after him here at the MEC.
You are a recipient of one, actually.
And he cared. He cared. He grew up in Traverse City, on the shores of Lake Michigan, and had a deep appreciation for the natural beauty and the wonders of Michigan, and wanted to make sure that it was protected, and believed that in public access, in public spaces, in doing the right thing as it relates to cutting down on pollution, both in the air and in the water. So he was a marvelous governor. Great guy to work for, I'll tell you.
I hear that time and again, and I came in right around his passing, and so it was especially a lot of folks were talking about him on staff and how about the impact that he had too. That's great to hear. Given, litter being a problem, given this sort of environmental ethic that was really starting to blossom in Michigan at the time, could you talk a little bit about what some of that initial opposition or fears were from some of those folks in this legislature or even abroad? What were some of those things that were holding back progress over those years from making the bottle deposit system a reality?
Well, we had a glass manufacturing plant in Charlotte at the time in Michigan, and that plant went away after the bottle bill. So it was a question of loss of jobs, which is why the AFL-CIO was opposed to it. It was interesting. UAW actually supported the bill, but the AFL opposed the bill at the time, way back in the 1970s. So, and you had really strong lobbying efforts on behalf of the beer and wine wholesalers, on behalf of the retailers, the grocery store retail association. There was a lot of opposition out there, and the concerns for them were, one, change. What are we going to do in a store to take back these bottles and cans? That was one of the issues. The other, there was a kind of a fake concern about, it's going to create, when you build this place and it's taking back all these old beverage containers, it's going to create a public health hazard because there'll be vermin all over the place. That was one of the campaign ads that they ran against us. And the response was, well, my mother always used to tell us to wash out those bottles, returnable bottles, before we took them back. And didn't yours?
Yeah. That's what the first thing you do.
That was kind of the response. Yeah. It was. There was considerable opposition, and they spent a lot of money. Now, fortunately, one of the key things that happened during the campaign, we had a thing in place nationally called the Fairness Doctrine, which meant that any broadcaster who used the public airwaves had to provide for fair coverage. That meant in terms of ads. So we got free ads. WJR down in Detroit was actually the first station to say, yeah, we'll give you some free ads. We're not going to run as many as the opposition is running, but we got free ads run on WJR, and then every other radio station and television station across the state bought into that, saying, yeah, we got to adhere to the Fairness Doctrine. Now, unfortunately, that was repealed in the 1980s. A federal requirement was repealed in the 1980s, which is why you have so many, one-way, either far left or far right broadcast stations today.
No kidding. Oh, well, the journalist in me wants to talk about that, but I don't want to lead too much into that.
It's an interesting question. Yeah,
that's very interesting.
So we had, WJR guaranteed they'd run one ad for every 3 that the opposition ran. Yeah. And so we were on the air. We were on the air.
I'm curious too. Like I definitely want to lean into what happened after the folks in the 70s voted in favor and passed this bottle bill. But I'm curious, like what helped shape the bottle bill into what it was? In what ways were the policies kind of thought about and narrowed down? And I'm thinking about this in the sense that when we look at our bottle deposit system today, the places where we can deposit our bottles and cans are a bit restricted, and so are the sorts of bottles and cans. Could you talk a little bit about some of that policy nuance that was being discussed then?
Sure. At the time, we didn't have bottled water; didn't exist, so nobody thought about. The litter was principally what were called at the time throwaway beverage containers, and it was mostly glass. Aluminum came on a little bit later, although there was some steel, and there was some. You can still find some old steel Drury's cans around, so water didn't exist. These hydration drinks,
your Gatorades, things like that.
The Gatorades, those kind of things. Yeah, I didn't want to use names, but
yeah, that's fair.
But those kinds of things didn't exist at the time. So the principal concern was glass bottles, which is one of the reasons that the bill was written in such a way. There's a two-tier system of deposits in the bottle bill, in the bill that was adopted by the people. 5 cents for refillable, 5 cents for refillable, which have basically gone away.
Yeah.
And 10 cents for non-refillable.
Yeah.
So refillables kind of drifted away from the market over time. You can still buy them occasionally, but and in some special places, but refillable bottles disappeared. We were trying to encourage refillable bottles at the time. Well, that didn't work. The industry went on and made everything non-refillable. However, it's now recycled. Michigan has had the highest return rate and recycling rate of bottles and cans of any state.
That's well, first I have to say, when you and I spoke with my coworker Trent a few weeks back,
Sure.
and when you revealed that the bottle bill had that 5-cent refillable sort of designation, that blew my mind. I never knew that existed.
Right. It's still in the law. Yeah,
Yeah, it's still in the law even to now.
It's still in the law. You get you only have to do 5 cents if it's a refillable bottle.
Yeah, it was such an amazing fact to hear. It made me realize I should probably really read the language of the bottle bill before I go on to these meetings. So instead of just getting the top line information from folks. But you mentioning that Michigan has had historically the best return rate or recycling rate for bottles
Correct.
and cans, I think really sets up kind of the next set of questions I have for you that I'd love to talk about. Before I do, though, are there any other sorts of pieces to this bottle deposit system that you want to discuss in terms of like its history back in the 70s?
Well, once the petitions were gathered, MUCC and Farm Bureau were sued by that coalition of opponents, saying that the petition was not valid because it didn't have a title, which is a requirement for the legislature to put on every bill. And however, the Supreme Court of the state of Michigan said you can't mess with the people's right to petition their government.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think that sets us up really well for the post-break talk, where we kind of turn a little bit more forward-esque looking at the bottle deposit system. So for folks tuning in, just hang tight. You're going to hear a word from our sponsor, Calsec, and then Bill and I will be right back with you. The Common Groundwater podcast is brought to you by Calsec, an international company headquartered in Kalamazoo that provides expertly crafted ingredients that help food and beverages look better, taste better, and last longer, all naturally. Calsec has set aggressive goals to send zero waste to landfills by 2030 and to create net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. You can learn more at calsec.com. Welcome back, folks. You're tuning in to Common Groundwater, a podcast by the Michigan Environmental Council. I'm Bo. I'm joined with Bill Rustem, and we are talking today about Michigan's bottle deposit system. Before the break, we talked a lot about its history, how it came to be, how it came out of the response of the people wanting to limit litter in Michigan. It came through a vote of the people, through a ballot initiative. And now I'd really like to maybe spend the second half of our podcast today talking about what's happened since that vote for the bottle deposit system and for Michigan as a whole. This was a people-powered campaign. You said about 2/3 of Michiganders voted in favor of it.
63-37.
63%.
Yep.
I'm curious, what was just kind of the general sort of level of excitement? Like, what were people's reactions leading up to that vote and then afterward as the bottle deposit system was being put in place?
Well, I think again, Michigan, I think has a special ethic about the environment because we're surrounded by such beauty, and the Great Lakes make a big difference, and they're all ingrained in all of us who grew up in Michigan. So that was an advantage that we had as leading up during the course of the campaign. I mean, it was we emphasized a lot about how much the opposition was spending to get this thing not to happen, because in their hearts, people knew it was the right idea, and so we emphasized a lot about how much they were spending to try to convince you that this wasn't going to work. And as a matter of fact, one leader of the union that was opposed to the bill told at a press conference with a bunch of reporters, said, only nuts and idiots are supporting this bill. And one enterprising reporter raised his hand and said, well, Governor Milliken supports the bill, so are you calling him a nut or an idiot? And that ended that conversation, of course, quite quickly. People, I think, generally listened to their hearts. and ended up voting yes. And again, I think that's part of the ethic that we all carry here in Michigan, because we are surrounded by such beauty.
Yeah. Just a few weeks ago, I'm not sure if it was you that mentioned this or someone else, but just talked about how for a lot of us, our first sort of environmental show of appreciation is by returning our cans and bottles as
That's
kids,
right.
Following our parents into the little into the
We
places.
used to pick up the refillable bottles. I used to pick up the refillables back when there were a lot of refillables. We get 2 cents for them, and we go pick them up, along the roadside. So when I was growing up, so we knew the system was going to work, and people knew that it would work because they'd experienced what I experienced. That when they were kids, they'd pick up these 2-cent bottles and take them back, and refillables, which we don't have anymore.
Yeah.
There are very few of them. And so they were accustomed to the way that the system used to work, and didn't like the idea really of throwaways.
Yeah.
They wanted to deal with that.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk a bit more about what's worked with the bottle deposit system. Before we do that, though, again, folks are listening. I'm sure if you're a Michigander, you know how our bottle deposit system generally works, where you buy a bottled or canned beverage, you pay a little bit more for it.
10 cents.
10 cents. Yep. You return it, you get your 10 cents back per bottle or can, and then you can spend that usually on groceries or things of that sort.
Right.
But are there any other sorts of mechanics going on in the background in terms of how these cans are collected, how they're being processed, that you might want to discuss?
Well, we created a brand new industry here in Michigan. The people that recycle, the people that built the machines that you go, if you go to a big grocery store, there's a machine there. You're putting your bottles and your cans in there. So somebody had to invent that machine. Somebody had to build that machine. Those machines are being built constantly. There are after the can is crushed or the bottle is crushed, there are people who do the recycling of those materials, recycle the aluminum, recycle the glass. So we have a bunch of industries around Michigan and in other states where there are bottle bills that take that and reuse it, as we should, back into bottles and cans. So
and there we go.
And there we go.
Yeah.
It's a loop.
Yep, it starts all over again. And I should mention too, and please correct me if I'm misspeaking on the terminology of this, but even for those bottles or cans that aren't going into the bottle deposit system, as in we're not turning them in and getting that 10-cent return back ourselves, even those that are recycled in our regular recycling systems are also still benefiting in some sort of way too, not only through recycling.
Yeah, the challenge is, however, that there's no reward for the consumer to make sure that they get recycled. There's a reward in the beer and pop industry for you to recycle. You get that 10 cents back.
Yeah, hence why people are always scouring.
That's
looking
right.
For the bottles
That's
and
why
cans.
people are scouring. Right.
Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about some of the impacts, how Michiganders in the 70s and continuing on today had this very sort of environmental ethic because of the place they grew up in. We also talked about before the intermission how our bottle deposit system quickly allowed Michigan to become a leader in recycling rates for those products. Could you talk a little bit more about some of the impacts that you've seen over the years, whether they be very data-driven or anecdotal when it comes to this system?
Yeah, well, clearly litter is down. Litter is down from what you and I remember back when we were kids. The amount of litter is down. We've created brand new industries, created a whole lot of new jobs in the recycling industry in Michigan. The effect has just been enormous, and we're having to not use as much sand to make glass anymore. We're recycling the aluminum, using it over and over again. So it's made a huge difference, not only in Michigan, but in terms of the impact globally. We use way less energy to reuse aluminum than you do to create brand new aluminum. So it has had an effect on reducing the carbon dioxide that goes into the air.
Yeah.
And it's just everything.
Yeah, less raw materials, less production.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think I've read too that glass and aluminum are some of the most easily recyclable
They are.
materials out there as well.
They are. They are. It works. It works.
Very cool. And I should mention too that folks have been polling, or not polling, but drawing data from our bottle return system over the years, and I think the recycling rates have been upwards of 90%
Correct.
year to year for the most part.
For the most part. Yep.
Yeah. You mentioned too that that the bottle deposit system created an economy of sorts around it. I even think of that too extending to like the can drives that I did in Boy Scouts or through my choir in high school.
Question.
Like, there's even a little bit of a nonprofit fundraising.
Oh, absolutely. I've given my bottles and cans to a Boy Scout troop. Yeah. They come knocking on the door. Yep. Say, oh yeah, you can take them.
Yep.
And there's been a little support for nonprofits groups coming out of it as well.
Yeah. When we're talking about impacts, it's also been almost a 50-year time span. Again, we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary.
Right.
And as you have hinted at, consumer trends have changed. The sort of products we're creating have changed. Technology, I'm sure, has changed. And while the bottle bill is proven through data and just through our own experiences as Michiganders to be very effective, you've hinted that there are some improvements that could potentially be made to this system. I'm wondering, what are some of those tension points that we've seen over the years when it comes to this?
Well, there are several. Number one, again, bottled water didn't exist. Mm-hmm. Hydration, bottles and cans and plastic bottles didn't exist back in the 1970s. Nobody thought about that. Nobody thought you could ever sell water in a bottle and make a profit at it. Yeah. So we didn't anticipate that. We clearly didn't anticipate that. So expanding the scope of what is covered by the bottle bill is one of those issues that probably, after two generations, which is basically 50 years is basically two generations, we need to start questioning some of the things that were written into that law. For example, the difference between a refillable and a non-refillable bottle probably doesn't make a damn bit of difference anymore, because there are so few refillable bottles. Yeah. So it's time to revisit some of the language in the bill and say, how can we make it better? The biggest issue is what it covers. The only amendment that has happened since 1976 was to add wine coolers to the bottle bill. That was adopted by the legislature. And we've got all kinds of other products out there now that frankly did not exist in 1976. So that's the big issue. Mm-hmm. Another issue is what 10 cents was worth back in 1976. It's not worth anymore. It's like 4 cents right now. What 10 cents was worth back then. So that's a question. Had we known at the time, or had we known what inflation was going to do, maybe an escalator would have been built in to the bill to have the deposit go up over time as inflation went up over time. So, but those are a couple issues that probably need to be addressed at some point.
And this is all theorizing, but considering how you're hard pressed to find a can or bottle that can be recycled right now, littered about for very long because people
to pick it up.
Pick it up. I'd imagine a similar effect. That's what we're thinking about when you're mentioning like expanding the number of bottles and cans. Is we know what the bottle deposit system of the current state can do for us. If we expand it, we might see similar sorts of effects.
Absolutely.
On our litter amounts.
Yeah. Absolutely.
This is actually maybe a great point for me to segue real quick into an opportunity for our listeners. We at the Michigan Environmental Council would love to hear some of your own thoughts about the bottle deposit system, whether they're positive or negative. And we'd love the opportunity, if you're willing, to be able to talk about them in some future podcast episodes. So if you check the description in the episode itself or in any of the social media or email that you might have received this podcast episode through, there'll be a form in there where you can put your name, your zip code, and any sorts of comments you have about your experiences again, good or bad, about Michigan's current bottle deposit system, or how you might want to see it change in the future. Bill, I also want to point out too, are there any things that you feel like are really important to keep in the bottle deposit system in the future if we do decide to make changes to it? Are there any things that are just working real well that we want to keep in place?
Well, I don't think you want to destroy the recycling industry that has been built up around the bottle bill.
Yeah.
And that's an important sector of the economy right now. And it's important for the long term for our kids and their kids. So keeping that recycling, helping that recycling industry grow, it to me is an important step for both that industry itself and for all of us, frankly. The more we recycle, the less raw product we have to use. So maintaining that is real important. Beyond that, I think the fact that people understand it, that people support it. If you ask a poll now, what do they support the bottle bill in Michigan? You're going to get like a 90% yes. People understand that it works. See, we only got 63% back in 1976. Now it's like up to 90%.
Yeah.
So you got to keep it, and any effort to try to repeal it, I think, is doomed to failure. And there have been efforts over time, as you can imagine, over the last 50 years. Periodically, somebody says, "Well, we need to repeal this law." It's not going to work.
Yeah.
People are too strongly supportive of it. So the question is, how do you make it better and work a little bit better than it does today?
Yeah, and I got to say that just personally, that always feels really good to talk about. On some of these mini-series past for this podcast, we're talking about issues that feel a bit more doom and gloom in a way.
Sure.
Whereas in this case, we have a system that has been proven to work, that we know people love.
Right.
And it's not so much of again, like us, it's us making a thing better, not creating the thing in the first place.
Right.
And so I think that feels really good to think about when it comes to this bottle deposit system.
Again, all of these issues, all the environmental issues, is not just about us. It's about our kids and their kids. And to the extent that we can protect and keep this beautiful state the way it is, to a large extent, keeping the natural places, not littering, reducing the amount of litter, reducing the amount of activity that messes up the natural systems, the better off our kids are going to be. And that's important.
Yeah, that's great. I think those are great words to end our episode
All
with.
right.
So, Bill, thank you so much again for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to our audience as well for tuning in, and a final thank you to our sponsor, Kelsec. Again, for folks listening, if you want to hear our next episode, we'll be talking a lot about applying some of the things that we talked about today into the idea of what our bottle bill, our bottle deposit system might look like in the future. So if that interests you, stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.